Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to today's webinar, let you know you are in the right place. Going to get things going in about another minute as we allow people to file in. Thank you for joining us. Again, just going to allow another 30 seconds or so for everyone to get settled in. We'll get going in about 30 seconds from now. An official hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Safety and Health Magazine webcast. From acknowledgement to belief and capability, SIF strategy, intervention, and outcomes, sponsored by Avetta. My name is Kevin Drewley. I'm an associate editor with Safety and Health Magazine, and will be moderating today's session. Thanks for joining us. In a few minutes, we'll start our presentation, but first let's review some preliminary items. The views of today's speakers and organizations are their own and may not necessarily reflect those of the National Safety Council or Safety and Health Magazine. Any mention of a commercial enterprise, product, or publication does not necessarily mean the council or magazine endorses those items. At the end of today's webcast, we'll conduct a question and answer session. To ask a question, simply click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, type your question, and click the send button. Feel free to ask your question at any time during the presentation. You don't have to wait for the question and answer session to begin. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible, but because of the large number of participants today, we might not get to every question. Any unanswered questions will be forwarded along to today's speakers. At the end of the webcast, you'll be asked to complete a brief evaluation survey. We'll let you know more about that after the presentation. This webcast will be archived, so you can access it after today's live event. To view this webcast and all of our past webcasts, please visit safetyandhealthmagazine.com/events. With that, let's go ahead and get started. Our speaker today is Scott DeBow. Scott is a certified safety professional who serves as director of EHS at Avetta. He works to align people, teams, and industry resources for safety within the joint employer community. Scott devotes much of his time to developing safety leadership across organizations with a targeted emphasis on systems improvements to address serious injuries and fatalities. Again, we thank you all for tuning into this presentation. Scott, whenever you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Kevin, and good day to everyone. Let's start with some good news. It's the first day of spring, so happy spring to you, and thank you for investing time, even brief time for an hour together today to talk about an important subject. We've in the safety community have had no shortage of SIF discussions, the challenges with serious injuries and fatalities. But our message today, our conversation of focus today is really how are we in the safety community helping our organizations get wind in their sails from acknowledging there's been a problem to really believing that we can and we should move forward in terms of how we're addressing that, how are we specifically targeting that. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you again for joining us. It's a quick note about me. I've been in safety 21 years or so. My background, as Kevin shared briefly, has been focusing on systems. What's the framework an organization can use to kind of get the different business functions around the same campfire to have good discussions about how are we really raising the bar, setting expectations, improving safety together? Because truth is, there's a mutual dependency for good safety outcomes to happen. And it depends on more than just the safety department. So I've really enjoyed a career where working alongside terrific people in organizations such as the National Safety Council has not only sharpened me, but given me an opportunity to come alongside you and hopefully leave you with one or two things today that are encouraging and helpful to you as well. So diving in, simple agenda. And we know we're talking about the challenges of serious injury and fatality. We'll start with what do we seem to agree on, right? There's things that we seem to agree on, and we'll also dive into the notion of belief. So I talked about how are we moving to belief and capability? What's behind that? What do I mean? So we'll spend just a short time exploring that, and then we'll go into where do we see progress happening? And when it comes to capabilities and SIF intervention, where do we see progress? Where's the impact? and especially in today's unique workforce. We'll talk a little bit about, the unique vulnerabilities and risks that are unique to not just one employer, but a chain of employers between primary employers, host employers, contractors, subcontractors, temporary labor agencies. It creates a network that needs to stay connected about how we're working safely. And then we'll talk about what's happening, the groundswell of not just interest, but efforts underway to help us, to equip us, to give us new information and tools, and the organizations we work for to give them new tools and hopefully wind in our sails so that we move from just acknowledging, look, serious injuries and fatalities have been a problem. I look forward to the day where we can talk about how we address this together and we see a continual and reliable year-over-year decline in the number of fatalities that we're seeing. And so that's why we're here. But moving forward, let's dive into this discussion of belief. And so as Kevin shared in my bio, I work for a software company. I work for Avetta. And as a safety professional, that's a little bit of a unique experience. I'm so glad that I do. And by the way, in the tech space, we'll talk a little bit about AI later, but safety professionals are really, really needed in the technology space. And so early in my tenure with Avetta, as we were talking about the need for systems and a framework to take us beyond compliance, there was a quick gut check moment. We had an executive ask me and said, Scott, do you really believe this is the right way forward? Do you believe that this is the right thing to do? And without hesitation, I said, yes, absolutely. And in that moment, I realized a few things. And the first was that often our leaders are kind of depending on not just our focus and strategy, but energy and belief in terms of what are we doing. And it's infectious in a positive way. But when we think about leading from a place of conviction, we all agree that, hey, no one should get hurt today, right? That's just kind of the mantra. I've heard that described as the moral imperative, but what's our conviction as an organization, me as an individual, the team I work on, the organization we serve, where's our conviction to strategically prioritize what are we doing about the challenge, about the problem with SIF? That's leading from conviction. It's connected to our belief. It's connected to our mission. And, hopefully I can encourage you early in terms of the importance of your voice and our collective voice around us. We'll talk about some of the resources that the National Safety Council and many others have already been working on to help the safety professional that may feel alone or may feel under-equipped on what do I do first or where would I start. But we are a community. We're within a network of professionals that kind of strengthen the position of what we're trying to focus on. So I want to start with a quick review of the Harvard Business Review. This was an article in October of last year, and a terrific article. And here's a point I want to make is when other disciplines, when other business functions, so academia, researchers, finance people, when they're seeing and saying the same things that we've been saying as safety professionals, pay attention. It's a good thing that we see and we hear other disciplines pointing out what we've been trying to accomplish in some cases for decades. But the point of this paper is that safety should be a performance driver. But where are we really? And the researchers asked, almost 80 executives, 30 companies, 8 different industries, and the feedback was a little bit troubling. And it's the mantra that, hey, no one should get hurt today. Safety is a core value, widely agreed upon. But when we connect that to the next metric we see is like, well, how is safety a part of your strategic imperative in your organization? There's a mismatch. There's a big disconnect here. And some of us, this may be no surprise to some of us, but I think as this is a recent part of research and study, it's still a challenge. And the challenge seems to be, look, our leaders have so much on their plate, from keeping the doors open to finance to managing risk, not just within occupational health and safety, but cyber business risk and sustainability and social matters of social importance. So the executives view when it comes to occupational health and safety is still from a compliance framework. It's a matter of cost. And the outcome of that understanding is that leaders typically underinvest in safety. And so part of our challenge as we address, well, can we really meaningfully impact the challenges and problems with SIF through a compliance framework? And I would share, and I believe others would agree, is like, no, we need more than just a compliance framework. As important as compliance is, we need to move beyond compliance and connect it to business strategy. So if you haven't read this article, I'd encourage you to do two things. One, look it up, download it, read it. It's a pretty short read. It's a good read. And think about who you might share this outside of your safety function, outside of your discipline, and see what they think of it, right? Maybe it's your boss. I've working in safety, I've reported to VPs of HR, the VPs of insurance, finance. So find opportunities just to share something that's recent and relevant and from a respected authority and see what conversations might happen. So, connecting it to the challenge here is, look, we must impact these numbers. We know that, but I believe we can, but we have our work cut out for us. And it is time to move. It's time to push. And when we look at the number of fatalities, we had a decrease from 2022. That's good. That's good. We always want to do better in this space, but I believe we can do significantly better. And we really need to get to a place where we see year over year consistent and reliable decrease in the number of worker fatalities. So is 3.7 decrease an anomaly? Were we lucky? What did we do specifically to make that happen? And, when we think of how often we lose another worker, the message is that we can impact these numbers and we should, but we want to think about how are we connecting strategic imperative and alignment with making this happen in our organizations. So when we think of the capability and progress, we'll talk about this for a few minutes. Where do we see progress happening? And where do we not? Where are we stuck? And sometimes that's the way I feel, stuck. And then the importance from an industry and workforce perspective. And I'd just like to add that when we think about today's workforce, the term worker, and if you look at the ISO standards, such as 45001, they moved from changing words around employee to worker for a specific reason. And it's to modernize executives and our leaders' thinking around who is in our workforce is a worker. That's important. They're members of our workforce. They may belong to a different organization, a contractor, a subcontractor, what have you. But the idea of approaching who is in our work system from the standpoint of moving away from the idea, well, here's our employees, but those are your employees. That was creating really significant disconnects that were not helping in any way. And so when we think about our modern workforce today and the progress needed, we're thinking our traditional employees, those with our same company logo and badging and so on. But we're also thinking those that we depend on to help us accomplish work. Contractors, subcontractors, that extended network of moms and dads, workers that are doing the same thing we're doing, but with a different business relationship. Safety must still be an imperative for them. So let's talk for a moment where we're seeing movement, where we've had challenges, but where we see movement. And so the discussion of metrics, and this is important to me, especially within the industry that I work in. And I've heard it say, look, I don't know if there's a perfect metric, but I do believe we could use a better metric. And so what I'd share with you is right now, what's being looked at, what we've learned over just the recent few years is that when we take a data set such as lagging indicators, and we're able to sort lagging indicator data in a way that prioritizes severity, right? A severity-based lagging indicator data set has more useful, more predictors, so to speak, in terms of, well, why did this happen and what should we do? What failed? Where were controls insufficient or not in place? What was in the work system specifically it's more intuitive. But we've been relying on, typically just traditional lagging indicators, total recordable incident rates, and so on. So right now, there's a lot of work going on in updating the ASTM standard to be used as a better metric, not just for simplicity in reporting around the world, but to help prioritize that severity-based lagging indicator that could be paired with the things that we do to monitor risk, to assure better safety. And we're seeing engagement from the players and the stakeholders we would need, whether that's investor relations community, whether that's from the agency or the regulators. But there are things that are moving in this space where we might think, look, if the total recordable incident rate has been a stick in the mud for the past 25 years, I think that mud around that stick is softening. And there's work being done to soften that ground, to get that thing to move. And one of the things that gave me great encouragement at the end of last year, I was a part of the Canadian Mining Institute safety conference. And whether in the US or outside of the US, what I hear and what I see organizations and regulators beginning to do is challenge the status quo, challenge the norm, whether it's the traditional safety metrics or whether it's incorporating elements of human and organizational performance and how they respond to an incident. And so it's an interesting time, and we see important industry partners such as National Safety Council, the American Society of Safety Professionals, which have always worked alongside the agency and the regulators, but building bridges between what are we doing together and agreeing that here is the significant problem. What more can we solve through compliance? There's agreement that to solve the SIF problem, it's beyond the compliance equation, but we have the stakeholders engaged and bridges are being built between the parties we need to get better. So I mentioned safety differently just a moment ago, and we'll talk about systems focus, a systems framework in just a little bit. But the HOP approach, human and organizational performance, when I'm not just hearing this from organizations that we get to work with, we're hearing it, as I said, from regulators. And I mentioned the Canadian Mining Institute that is taking and learning safety differently into their approach, where enforcement is certainly still a part of what they do, but no longer is at the primary point of the spear that they're leading into with, right? They're coming in to evaluate and actually help organizations along the way. And that was pretty exciting to hear and to see. But there's certainly the areas where we're stuck. And this is where we want to do a quick gut check. And we want to think about, well, how am I leading my organization right now in terms from a knowledge standpoint, from a belief standpoint? Some of us I know are really excited. Some of us have been trying and we feel stuck and it's discouraging. But across the industry, we recognize that it's exciting to think we see where we're stuck and we're working to provide better guidance across the industry, specific to SIF prevention, to enable that new leadership expectation. So remember from the Harvard Business Review, a leadership expectation that when leaders think of safety, not just from a compliance standpoint, but from a performance standpoint, when they embrace that, when they embrace safety, investment in safety, strategic priority with our business objectives creates performance, that's the current we want to be swimming in. And so it's exciting to see that happen. And so when we think about, I mentioned areas we're stuck, sometimes this is me. We're met with a big challenge that's bigger than I can move by myself. And so, I like to use this, whether we're talking about total recordable incident rates, the traditional things we've done to say this contractor's safe, this contractor's not safe, or this worker is good, or this worker is not good. Whatever it might be, we have some big things in front of us that we've traditionally measured and thought of safety with. And so sometimes that's me, but what's happening is look, there's folks that are coming alongside us at the professional level, at the industry level, at the agency level, and there's this sense of a groundswell coming along. Where it's like, well, hey, Scott, you're obviously not strong enough. Let's work together. Let's pry this thing forward. And we're not there yet. I believe we will be. There's going to be a moment of much rejoicing when we see the boulder start to move. And so, look, the work is underway to get this work behind the boulder and to create a new momentum, a better metric, a better way to think and safety differently, but to focus on the things that we depend on the most for work to go well. Whether that is our traditional worker model, whether that's our traditional alongside our contracted community, I believe we'll get there. So when we think of some of the challenges with our traditional metrics, I wanted to take just a little bit of time and explore what's really happening. And I've heard it say, well, what's wrong with the way we're doing things now? And sometimes we hear this from our friends or safety professionals that are maybe close within the procurement community, or risk management and insurance. Value metrics very, very much and used to what they're used to. Well, let me just kind of compare three different contractors alongside each other here. And in the status quo, when we talked about, there's no perfect metric, but there could be a better metric connected to a better process that gives us more context. So we can see, well, look, company A, we're evaluating them, and should they be in our work system? Wow, 4 fatalities sounds like a lot. We're often missing those 3 little bullet points underneath that. The context of, all right, that's one event, right? It was a company vehicle, unfortunately struck by a drunk driver. And then, we're often looking and focusing just on company B's 2 fatalities. But again, we're missing that context. We're missing that important information around, well, these were 2 separate events, both within the expected and required knowledge and capabilities for the employer to ensure that, hey, either the shoring equipment or the fall protection was in place to have prevented these events. That's insightful. That should inform our decision-making, our risk-based decision-making. And then the fact of the matter is we have companies such as Company C. Look, 4 fatalities, separate events, responding to a national crisis, big storms, the company that comes in and gets our power back on, and they go through very, very high risk environments that are unpredictable and we often see. So the questions we want to be asking is, well, what more should we be asking? What more would we want to know? And does the current process allow for that? I know we're talking about how do we move from just acknowledging the problem of SIF to belief, but how we're treating our workforce matters. Our contracted community is growing. There's a higher ratio of contractors in our workforce than there are traditional employees. And that model is continuing to grow, right? We expect companies to continue and to increase the use of contractors in their work systems rather than dialing that back. And so when we think about our workforce today, again, just a quick gut check. How does our organization think about our workforce? Just my employees and your employees? There's real challenges with that. But as safety professionals, we have the opportunity to kind of think about this and begin, how are we really beginning to learn to assess who do we want in our work system? And it's really as if we do have an old model alongside new expectations. And so if we think about, any number of unfortunate case studies where a contractor was killed on a work site, fell through a skylight, whatever it might be, but the client or the host employer had unique knowledge that could have prevented this, but the business arrangement just didn't prioritize communication about certain risk between those employers. That's kind of the old model. But the new expectation, the right expectation, is that we move past that, right? And so just viewing, hey, that the transfer of risk, a view of contractual or a compliance-based approach. And if somebody else's employee is injured, well, that's not our problem. That goes on their log, right? Well, that's not creating the work systems. That's not creating the performance in our work systems that we can't. I believe there's a better way, and we're onto it. We're rolling towards that. So let's shift to some groundswell discussions. A groundswell, if you think about it, if you go to the ocean, if it's a windy day, you see a wind swell and it's sloppy. But a groundswell is when you look out and the ocean's calm and there's kind of an energy or a pressure, a low pressure system offshore that's kind of pressing down on the ocean. It's bringing a cadence of energy, a cadence of waves. We're on the shore and we can look out and see where this energy is coming in, and we can time when we go meet them and get a great ride back to the shore, right? That's what I mean with groundswell. And right now, what I see, again, between our regulators and our industry and our safety professionals with the knowledge to push things forward, there is a groundswell of interest, rightly so, on how we're solving the challenges of SIF. And so we'll talk about industry efforts, active efforts going on right now. And I'm a bit of a podcast junkie. So if, I don't know if you're like me, but cutting the grass or working in the garage or sometimes at the gym, whatever, I like to listen to podcasts. This is one of them, Todd Conklin's podcast. It's back from October, but this is a great statement in terms of what the head of OSHA really thinks about total recordable incident rates and why we're using them so much. So the impression was that, well, OSHA insists that we measure contractors with total recordable incident rates, or that it's the law, or and he was asked at a conference and shares his response is that it's really the employers that insist we're using these metrics. Employers care about this more than OSHA does. Not to say OSHA doesn't care about it, but OSHA is using it as a broad view of what's happening in the industry. It was and recognizes, because they're the ones that designed it and developed it, to be used as a metric that was just informative to them more broadly than individually evaluating this small contractor alongside this big contractor or this big company with more hours and so on. So I really like this quote, and I think it's like, okay, this is just kind of another it's kind of another groundswell, right? This is another piece. It's like we're getting these things together. I know there's still challenges and differences of opinion, but we want to be a part of what's going on, and you are a part of what's going on. And I think this is encouraging, especially when he's referencing, and what I see is that the employers are primarily and predominantly focusing on this. It's like, where in the organization is it set that how we will measure safety performance? And sometimes that is the chief risk officer or the who's responsible for workers' compensation, right? And the organization, of course, has to do annual reporting, and so we're doing OSHA logs and so on. And then, as I said, we're looking at big extended work systems where we use contractors and the procurement department, executives and procurement teams. For decades, we've just been using this one number as the number to use. And so we think it's a better time to really start looking and evaluating, what else should we be measuring? And again, back to the work that's going on now to get to a better metric. And beyond that, get to the place where we can continually monitor and assess risk within our work systems, and specifically target the things we need to do, help employers understand how do they take their resources and priorities and safety, and specifically have an intentional plan of action to address SIF risk in their organization. So that's a lot of the work that we have to do. And as we've mentioned before, it means moving beyond compliance. And we need a few things to do that. There's things that I found that are very helpful. Again, so I can talk about the limitations of total recordable incident rate, but then when we go to, what's this current system that's currently measuring that? It's outside of safety. That's in procurement or a different business group. But I found that systems discussions, providing a systems framework, is very, very helpful in getting other business partners on board with what we're talking about. And technology plays a pivotal role in helping us to create a better performance framework, move beyond compliance as well. And so as we dive into this, just a quick visual in terms of where have we been. So I would say that, look, you and I, as we're here today, many of us have been in safety a while. We're most likely very well informed or current with the discussions around SIF, or maybe plan, do, check, act methods, systems management. We're current in 2025 with generally what's happening, or we're not very far away. We're kind of within the safety community, right? We're hearing and we're listening to things, and we're pretty well informed. But when we think about those in our work system that monitor and measure safety and develop strategy, their view of how to do it and how it impacts the organization is really back here in the 70s, right? 70s and 80s, maybe the 90s, we'll give that to them. But it's very, very grounded in compliance. Now, here's the dual message around compliance is we don't want to bash those. We don't want to bash compliance. We're not doing that. Compliance is important. In fact, it's in place because of many, many unfortunate things happening. It's the plumb line we measure up to. We need compliance, but it's more of a foundation and a launching pad towards performance, but it's not often viewed that way. And so when we're having discussions about how are we moving forward, it's important to stop for a moment and just appreciate how much knowledge we really have, and how much knowledge and belief we have to offer our friends in the organization, that their frame of reference may be 20, 30 years behind us. Look, given the state of things, that's okay, right? How do we make a compelling and engaging discussion with those that we need to lock arms with for a better path forward? And so I just wanted to share that with you for a moment. And especially, again, unique to my world is again, in 2025, with all of the knowledge that many of us possess when it comes to evaluating our workforce, we're still focusing on the things that are important, but we're overestimating what's really happening in terms of a risk standpoint once work begins, right? How quickly work changes, how brittle communications are. It can be a challenge with our traditional workers, but especially as risk changes, and then the importance and priority of communication between parties, that's already brittle. It's not a good combination. And so we really have a weak system of monitoring and review. And as we're thinking about systems and framework, for several of the organizations I've worked for, including where I am now, we've allowed, or we've partnered together to say, well, what's moving beyond compliance really look like? All right. And so some of you may look at the organizational learning model, and this is what we've built internally for two reasons. One, the company in the mirror, or me, the safety professional in the mirror, is like, hey, to really help address and develop better partnership and systems, better quality conversations about what we're doing, not just to evaluate our contracted workforce at stage one. By the way, this is the great opportunity where planning happens. Well, what are the critical points in time we can define to ensure we're planning on what we're going to do given the type of work that's about to happen. You know, for example, without planning, continual risk assessment or monitoring of risk really doesn't happen. So how do we plan in order to connect? We'll talk about technology in a moment. We really can't do this without technology in today's world. But how do we use our stage one traditional compliance measures, which are still important, as a launching pad into stage two, and then highly valuing the feedback from those that are doing the work, right? Our workers, be they traditional, contracted, or subcontracted. They have unique intel in terms of what's really happening on the ground that we can feed back into our planning. And so why I share this with you is I've done this in organizations where, hey, we're primarily in distribution centers or manufacturing, and systems framework and Plan, Do, Check, Act have been helpful, and we've made it work. Today, as I work within a technology company, and I said before, hey, we need more safety professionals in technology companies because they're open to how do we do things better. And they may understand things from a compliance standpoint, but they don't quite understand from a systems approach, a systems framework. But we are open to how do we do that together. And so this is one of the things that internally I call our little campfire. We lock arms and with our product and operations and sales and discuss how are we helping advance better practice through these categories. So another effort alongside that, when we talk about how are we taking systems frameworks and introduce, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to advance that quickly. How are we introducing new elements of systems management into a traditionally compliance-driven process is, our safety maturity index. We've been working very hard on, and just takes the, typical your safety leadership, the things we depend on, hazard recognition, hazard identification and control, each with key SIF criteria that we want to validate and assure, and not from a standpoint of being punitive and saying, hey, you don't have this, you're out, but hey, you're missing corrective action program or evidence of corrective action after you identify the risk, closing that loop, so to speak. Here's some resources to help you do that. And that is what we believe is a really big part of the new value discussion. The new, a better path forward. How are we advancing beyond pre-qualifications within our organization? We had to look in the mirror and say, what are we really doing? And how are we moving alongside with those that we have the fortune to work with, our clients and our customers? So a couple other things I mentioned, that connecting the workers to resources. National Safety Council has been a terrific partner in helping us to guide contractors to elements of maturity, elements of improvement, SIF prevention, SIF knowledge, SIF specific modeling. And if you did not know this, there's a QR code coming up in a minute. You can screenshot it, but the National Safety Council has done incredible work on creating a serious incident fatality prevention model. And no surprise, we see Plan, Do, Check, Act here. We're pulling from the same knowledge pool in our different organizations, but we're aligning very, very well. And if you can peek over to the right, we see, look, plan, leadership commitment. And as you click on that, it opens up knowledge and tools and checklists and information to help kind of spur you on, stir your thinking in terms of how you might connect these things in your organization. And that's exactly what we want, and exactly what we see as the importance for the contractors that are in our work systems as well. So this was a recent SIF prevention workshop done by Perry Logan. Outstanding workshop. You can go to the NSC site and access this, listen to it. And here is the QR code, by the way, if you wanted to access this and research it, pull it in. So, for me, so if you've been in safety a little bit of, a year or 3 years or 5 years, and systems or Plan, Do, Check, Act is new to you, that is 100% okay. That is completely okay. Please don't think that you have to spend X amount of time in the safety profession before you go learn and do in the area of systems or plan, do, check, act. What I'd encourage you to do is just take resources such as this, dive in, think about how you might apply it within your sphere of influence and have discussions about it. So for me, that began at a site level, and then multi-site level, and then state level, and then regional, national, and the model works. This has been in place for decades, the Plan, Do, Check, Act model and thinking, but this is terrific resources, and again, steered specifically towards SIF intervention and intended and written in such a way that helps your organization to adopt it. So great resources for you. And then I just want to shift gears for a moment and talk about technology. So technology to me is, I kind of reference it. It's the thing that helps us monitor risk at the speed of business. And, the first time that happened for me it was probably 12 or 15 years ago, and we had just gotten a new safety app. It was cutting edge and we were all excited, but that's great. We have a new app. So what? Well, the so what became a big so what when one of our directors was able to use the app to communicate very specific, risks, serious risks that was occurring at a remote location of the country that had very few resources to address and otherwise would not have been addressed if we weren't able just to connect to where I was and to where the proper leadership was to support this team to remove that potentially fatal risk involving that employee in that work cell. And so that's where I kind of got the idea. Technology helps us to monitor and stay connected to the present state of risk so we can quickly become informed and make good decisions about how we do that. Now, so entering the technology discussion and AI, right? Another few initials that there's no shortage of in today's discussions. But I was surprised to learn that it's been around since the 50s. And as we kind of go through the progression of what's been done and how we're using AI right now, specific to risk assessment and how kind of from a back end, we're using it to, again, inform the worker around SIF specific criteria that they may want to consider. But there's still kind of the challenge is, hey, is this a friendly robot or unfriendly robot? And I've heard this described, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I've heard this described as what's important when it comes to the AI discussion is garbage in, garbage out still applies. I think of it as a four-walled garden. I've heard it described as a four-walled garden, and the knowledge within that garden is what's available to the employee. So we want a good garden of information that's secured to give the employee the right information, the right reference resource, and so on, rather than just reaching out to anywhere in the internet where we can get not so good information. So the importance of the technology, and could be AI or it could be how we're staying connected through technology, is it's helping us to answer these questions. These are important questions. These are questions I always kind of built through my team and our operations managers to ask these three questions is, 90 days, no injuries, but right now, is work happening like we think it should be? And if we think it is, well, what tells us that? Well, and we can't use the term, well, because nothing bad's happened. No, what is it that's telling you risk is at acceptable levels right now? And it's a new way of thinking. And so these questions helped others to begin thinking a little differently. And certainly, how are we improving? And can AI and technology help us to do this? And especially tying it back to kind of our theme around what are we doing? And does this have a role in SIF prevention? Absolutely. So we still think, as important as it is to think how we're leveraging technology and these tools is kind of the number one important thing here is the worker. And I believe always will be. They have real world experience. They have contextual understanding that no machine or other worker that hasn't been in that situation would know. They have real insight, they have real intel about what's happening. When a certain thing begins to vibrate or spin at a different RPM or whatever it might be, they have the knowledge and insight that technology should be supporting in terms of what's happening. It should serve to strengthen the worker, in other words. And so we've been using this in kind of a combination with our kind of our plan, do, check, act thinking. It's like, great, we've achieved good foundational compliance. How are we leveraging planning through this stage to address, certain types of work tasks? Where do we want to see risk assessed? What do we want to see? And how do we support better risk assessment through technology? And so it can be done. And, if you find yourself, I would be highly surprised if you are in safety today and you're not working alongside closely those in your product development or configuration. You're I don't know if it's IT necessarily, but your technology groups that are helping you build cleaner data sets, stay connected in terms of what's happening. And so today's safety professional needs to be thinking along the lines about, look, technology really matters in terms of how we're staying connected, because we do believe we can impact these numbers. I don't believe we can impact these numbers as well as we can unless we connect it to a better performance framework, a systems framework, and we leverage the importance of technology to keep us connected between the multiple parties in our work system in a way that prioritizes SIF prevention, in a way that prioritizes communications and support. So these things tie in together to really take care of the most important thing. Who's this about? This is who it's about. These are somebody's sons and daughters, somebody's grandparent or aunt and uncle. This is our workforce. So which of these are traditional employees and which of these are contractors? And does it really matter? No. When it comes to prioritizing and preventing serious injury and fatality, we need to keep in mind who this is about. And we need to make sure we appreciate our voice in the process. The intensity and the enthusiasm we bring, coupled with knowledge, a systems framework, a better path forward to help others understand that are in adjacent departments, be they finance or procurement or risk management. It really comes down to us. So I'd encourage you with this: believe that you can move the needle in SIF prevention. I believe we can do it too, but we can't do it unless we do it together. So, thank you for how you're leading in safety. I think we're at a great time, Kevin or Alan, if we could pause for a moment and take a few questions and see what else we can learn from each other with the time we have left.
Yes, excellent. Great job, Scott. Thanks for sharing your insights and expertise. Before we do start the Q&A, just want to let everyone know about the evaluation survey that we're asking you to complete. The survey will open in a different screen after this webinar. Your input's very important as it helps us to improve our future webcasts. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, type your question, and click the send button to submit. If we don't get to your question today, we'll forward along any unanswered questions to Scott. And now we will start with the Q&A. First one asked, where is the best place to start to encourage my leaders or organization to better prioritize SIF prevention?
Hey, that's a great question. So where's the best place to start? I'd point back to a couple of things. One, they hired you for a reason, and you were important. So with respect to, I don't know exactly what your situation is or where you are in the organization. I would encourage you to think through how you might arm yourself with interesting knowledge or industry facts, such as examples of this could be the Harvard Business Review that talks about safety as a performance opportunity and how we're not leveraging that. What if? So how might you read that and create a what if we could and find areas of performance that can engage safety thinking and where you can introduce new concepts and take a lesson from me. So I stopped introducing concepts of human and organizational performance as fundamental one because they tuned out. But think about how you create your knowledge and say, how is our organization better anticipating error? here's an example of what our team did or what this site did, and here's an example. How would we multiply this across our sites? Actually, how could we develop this into a strategic imperative, right? And we anticipate error, solve problems as teams, create systems that drive better outcomes. And by the way, can we talk about metrics for a moment? So great question. And I think about who the reporting relationship is to. So if you report up to VP of safety, most likely they're going to get it. Sometimes I've seen VPs of safety that are in charge of human resources, really, or they might have a different business function. But overall, think about what the organization's current focus is and how they're prioritizing, how they prioritize their communications around safety. Is it more compliance based? There's a lot of opportunity there. And I'd encourage you to check out a couple of other websites. Go to CSRA, so Construction Safety Research Alliance.org. So specific to construction industry, but terrific research and background and resources around the better use of metrics, about how to better assess risk specific to SIF prevention, and stories of where companies are doing that well. So a couple ideas, hopefully they're helpful for you.
All right, thank you. Next question asks, do you have any insight into why in E2920, the numerator uses 1 million instead of the traditional 200,000 hours?
Sure. Well, first, thanks, David. First thing I'd tell you is the E2920 standard is currently being rewritten for a 2025. That's been reviewed and discussed, but what I believe this is connected to is that we're thinking about global application. There's a couple of important reasons why E2920 was written in the first place. And one is to create a consistent metric to be used anywhere in the world. Developed countries, undeveloped countries, and different countries use different hours, right? Slightly different metrics. This was used as part of their equation to better represent, I think, what they're trying to accomplish globally for a more consistent metric. So, but stay tuned and listen for the E2920. And if you're attending NSC Congress in September in Denver, which I hope you are, there'll be workshops on E2920, and there'll be workshops on SIF prevention specific to new ASTM standards. So stay tuned, and I hope I see you in Denver.
Next question asks, where can I find the resources for learning AI's application to HSE?
Good question. Thanks, Armand. Where is my new book? So a couple of things. I would read just about technology in general. And the important thing is, like, as safety professionals, we have an opportunity to kind of level set. And there's a lot of tension around the subject of AI. And so arm yourself with good reading. One of the books I've read is Humans Are Underrated. It's been around a while, but it talks about the use of technology. And when new technology comes out, there's always change, but it gives, I think, the safety professional a good way to just kind of moderate the discussion around AI. I'd encourage you to check out what's happening at the American Society of Safety Professionals. So ASSP.org has an AI task force, which is doing terrific work and has come out with outlines of, initial places to start in terms of what should the HSC, the safety professional, be thinking to approach the subject of AI. And I would say, as you do that, partner with somebody else outside of safety in your organization where AI is a part of the discussion, because there's so much I have learned around security and different sources for AI information. Again, kind of getting back to that four-walled garden, we're looking at what we build for HSE, what we build to draw from a health and safety standpoint. We want the best information, and we want to protect bad or good information from being blended with dated or not so good information. So check out ASSP.org, AI Task Force, the work they've been doing. There's some that's already been done. There's more coming, but great question.
Can you share some insight into the most successful precursor identification and analysis tools?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So look, from a practitioner, I believe I have more to offer you than an overview of the tools you would go to develop precursors or precursor identification. Um, so look, how I've developed precursors is one, most organizations have an abundance of data. It's hard to develop good precursors. I mean, we can use I mentioned CSRA earlier. They've done work and papers on the most common precursors. So there's industry white papers on general precursors and what they are. Fred Manuel in his earlier SIF work um, described certain types of precursors, like when work goes from normal to non-normal, when change happens, the specific general precursors. But my experience in developing precursors unique to the organization comes from taking data the organization currently has, which there's no shortage of claims data or OSHA reportable data, but cleaning it up so it's useful. All right. What I mean by that is, well, cleaning it up so we have a data set that is more in line with severity, right? Severity-based lagging indicators, right? Those are what have stronger predictive qualities. And so as I've worked on cleaning data sets, I've found that it's clarifying in terms of, well, what are the precursors we should be focusing on? And I found that they're often surprising. Sometimes they're directly related to a change at a work site, specific to a piece of machinery or equipment. But often I found they're operational. So for example, my last organization, one of the number one precursors is when we have leadership turnover, right? We found commonalities in cleaning up our data and asking questions. Well, what happened before this event from an operations standpoint? We found often we were missing key leadership elements. They were in transition, there had been sudden growth, and that precursor, leadership turnover or absence of a leader in certain areas, became a priority, a SIF restoring priority for the organization to solve for. So I don't have any names of tools that you should go out and buy or look at. I apologize for that. I just have kind of my own industry experience on what's been useful, but I'd encourage you to check out the work by Fred Manuel, check out the work by CSRA, specific to precursor development or general precursors, and I think you'll find that helpful.
What valuable alternative metrics are available or can you focus on other than TIR?
Yeah, so alternative metrics. So, we talked about the kind of the lagging piece and the ASTM. As far as I'm concerned, like that's an alternative metric that I found very useful. I know some organizations are also they might use claims data. What data does the organization have available to them? But let's not spend too much time talking about lagging. Let's talk about, look, leading indicators. We can spend a lot of time collecting them and they not do anything unless we have what someone just asked earlier, precursors, right? What are those things that informs us? What should we specifically go do and monitor and assess and verify that these controls are effective, that these controls are reliable and put in place? Those are some of the most important. I think this ties in with JB's question next. Some of the most important leading indicators that we think are effective is those leading indicators specifically and connected, tied to a SIF intervention strategy where we've developed precursors. We're informed from an industry and a risk standpoint and organization specific in terms of injury experience or things that have happened in the past. What are those things we should go do to make sure that, if we have failure with these controls, how do we respond? How does the organization respond to that effectively? Where are we missing controls? Interim controls. Sometimes we discover there needs to be so great leading indicator activity Maybe we just go look for absent or missing controls. And how do we restore? What's the number of interim controls we have in place now? Maybe it's 4. And a leading indicator, maybe we don't want to call it that. Let's just focus more on, hey, we want to get permanent controls in place of these 4 interim controls. Every organization has limitations and boundaries. Maybe this next quarter, that number goes from 4 interim controls to 2 interim controls. And that's progress. And we can measure that. We can show for that. So that's the way I think about it. And we're right at the hour. So Kevin, I don't know if we have any more time, but this may be a good place for us to land. Thank you for your amazing questions and being here today.
Well, no, absolutely. Thank you, Scott. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, and we're sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions, but all today's unanswered questions will be forwarded along to Scott. And once again, we hope you take the time to fill out that forthcoming evaluation survey, and please give us your feedback. And with that, we end today's Safety and Health Magazine webcast. We'd like to thank Scott DeBow, everyone at Avetta, and all of you who listened in. Thanks and have a safe day.